Aloha and welcome back. Will the ADEPT Committee of 2025 come back to order? The time is now 1:53 p.m. Thank you all for your patience. The internet was a little bit slow today, so we got a very exciting item on the agenda. Let's continue. In accordance with Rule 7B of the Rules of the Council, the committee will receive a presentation and discuss matters relating to the Maui County Ferry Feasibility Study. No legislation action will be taken. Members, you probably recall that in FY 2024 budget session, I made it a budget priority to include $300,000 to fund a feasibility study on the operation of a county-owned ferry. After an extensive public engagement process overseen by our County Department of Transportation, we're now excited to be able to hear from the MPO Executive Director, Batangan, Diane Yogi, Deputy Director of Transportation, Neo Nakamoto, Transportation Program Specialist, Department of
Council for the opportunity to work on this project. Prior to starting this effort, I don't think I quite appreciated how difficult inter-island travel was for our residents on Molokai and Lanai, and have really enjoyed getting to know the communities on Lanai, there, the challenges that they face, and I think we're pretty proud of the proposals that we're about to share with you today. So mahalo for that opportunity. I will ask for you to, we'll go through introductions with the project team. Kawana Batangan with the Maui Metropolitan Planning Organization. That we're gonna have to skim through, but we're happy to go into details with anything that you guys have questions on following the presentation. Okay. So the purpose of this was to assess the feasibility of creating an inter-island ferry system between Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. It was primarily for goods and services, so we were not looking at anything that would transport vehicles. So it's not the super ferry model. We were also looking to purchase the vehicles and then contract out operations and maintenance, similar to the way that the Maui bus operates. And that's largely because it's easier for the department to get.
We'll go through this basically in the order we did a lot of the work, go through a little bit of background on the project, what we found, some of the engagement we did, recommendations for services, and then some of the environmental considerations we heard, and some of the regulatory environmental considerations, recommendations for operation and management, and then a process by which this could be implemented and the financial analysis. And I think it's going to be clear to everyone that the implementation is tied closely to the finances, and will actually, the actual implementation will be driven by that. So next slide. Next slide. This background. So when we started the service, we took a look at what's out there now, what has been there, what's the history of transportation between the islands, and this is just a simple map of what used to be, which was ferry service from Manele to Lahaina and from Kaunakakai to Lahaina, as well as there's currently air service from Lanai and Molokai to Maui, and there is currently ferry service from Manele to Ma'alaia. So that's kind of the starting point, and we tried to build on that. Next slide. Next slide. There you go. So the service concepts that we developed were based on multiple factors. We were consideration of travel times, how long does it take to get across, and that's based on the operating speeds and the travel times that we know are currently viable, as well as looking at the previous schedules from the service from Molokai. Where you can land the ferries, what are the potential landing sites? There's not that many of them, and Lahaina is currently not available, and so the timing and implementation is contingent on developments and community work being done there in Lahaina. And we did a lot of feedback and engagement, and we got a lot of interesting and helpful information from both interest groups and the general public. We developed initial short-term and long-term concepts for serving Lanai and Molokai. And then the final recommendation concepts, we tried to balance all of the feedback we got with some of the MDOT needs and limitations related to subsidies and staffing. Next slide, please. So the engagement work that we did 2 rounds of engagement. The first round was basically listening to the people. We held 2 meetings in each of 4 locations. 155 people came to the meetings in person. We also conducted an online service with over 1,700 responses. Generally, what we heard was consistent between the online survey and the in-person meetings, and between the stakeholder meetings and the general public meetings. There's concern about the environment was a priority. Both whales and other sea life, invasive species, and emissions were kind of the 3 broad categories. There's a need for good transportation links on the ground. You can't necessarily walk from the ferry landing to many places, so you need another way to get there, and you need to have those transportation links. And there's also a need recognized and expressed for Kama'aina fairs in recognition of the people that have lived on the islands. Lanai had some additional interests for service, more service, and there's a freight service that they would like to continue to carry packages in larger parcels than they can take on the normal ferry, something they would like to see, and better access to the terminals, both at Ma'alaya and Lahaina. Molokai, we did this engagement before Mokulele ran into their issues, and so everything that was heard on Molokai is even more in need and is a higher priority now. Travel is difficult, concerned about the environment. As you know, the Molokai community is of many opinions on the amount of tourism and visitors to the island. And there's a recognition that any service back to Lahaina needs to be done in collaboration with the community there. And folks on Maui said they would love to have service that bring day workers to Maui. Next slide. So the second round of engagement, we had some initial concepts we put out there just to get some feedback on those ideas. Generally, we heard the same sort of things. Generally, there's support. Some of the details went back and forth. There seemed to be a lot of support for returning ferry service to Lahaina when the time is right. Similar issues specifically on Lanai and Molokai. One thing that came up from the Lanai was there's a split between interest in returning to Lahaina and going to Ma'alaya, and so there may be some ways to address that. Each landing site has its benefits and its drawbacks for the residents and for services there. Next slide. So real briefly, this is the map of the recommended services. Short-term, Ma'alaya to Manele, continue what's being done there. Once Lahaina is available, you know, it would make sense, and the financial analysis was built on service from Lahaina to Kaunakakai and Manele. Next slide. So in the short term, the recommendation is for Lanai is to continue service as essentially it is, 3 round trips daily, and this is something that could be done relatively short, simply. Basically, if the county were to acquire the assets from Expeditions and run the contract service, as Kaunaway mentioned, similar to the way the bus runs, that would be relatively simple to do. It's there and it could be done without an interruption in service, which is critical, 3 round trips a day. For Molokai service, because there is no good landing on Maui for that service now, that gives you time to get the assets you need and align the start of service with the reopening of the harbor at Lahaina. And in an ideal world, those would happen at the same time. Long term, we could see, we'd recommend service to Lanai, possibly going to 4 round trips a day. And we looked at the feasibility and considered service some days of the week to Lahaina, some days of the week to Maalaea as an option. As I mentioned, there's pros and cons to each one in terms of travel times, services available, how long it takes to get to the shopping here in Kahului. And so this is something that it wasn't clear and there's not a strong definition. So some additional work would be recommended to figure that out. But you've got some time, and as things develop, that's a couple years out. So make a final decision closer to the actual implementation. And then for Molokai, service 2 round trips a day, similar schedule to what was run before, with service from Kaunakakai and Lahaina. Next slide. So while we were doing our study, and in recognition of the urgency of starting service to Molokai, the county issued RFIs to see if there were operators available and willing to provide charter services in the interim. And there were several responses received. Expeditions responded that they're available to provide contract service between Maui and Lanai. No one seemed to have vessels, assets, ability to provide service in the very short term between Maui and Molokai, and this is largely due to the length of the route. If you have to go from Maalaea to Kaunakakai, it's a very long run. The water is very rough, so the vessels that service Lanai could make the run. Coast Guard would say it's okay, they're certified for those waters. It would be a very long and very rough and not a good ride. So until Lahaina is available, that makes regular service to Molokai very difficult. Next slide. So getting a little bit more into the details of Lanai for the short term. Continue as is, same assets, same schedule. We recognize that sailing at night is not recommended because of the risk of whale strikes and where the whale activity takes place, and so we don't recognize or recommend extending the service day, but continue as is, and that service would be provided by the expeditions vessels. And one thing to note while we have this image up here of the harbor at Manele, it's a small harbor. And as we mentioned, the waters between Maui and Molokai are very rough. And what we heard talking to both the expeditions operations and other operators is you need a larger vessel to make that crossing to Molokai safely and efficiently and reliably. And the bigger vessel you would need to do that would not fit into the harbor here at Manele. So there's it makes things a little more difficult than we were hoping they would be. But anyhow, that's short term for Lanai. Next slide. Next slide.
Apologies, Chair. We're experiencing a bit of a delay in the translation. Oh, there we go.
Okay. So in the long term, as I mentioned, the community was split on whether service should continue to Maalaea or return to Lahaina or do both. And so that mixed service is probably something that is worth understanding in more detail when you get closer to actually being able to operate that service, and we have a better sense of what the demand is going to be, what the vessels are going to be, are there new developments at either one, and so look into that when you're much closer to actually returning to Lahaina. And you could do, if you are running from Lahaina, you could run up to 4 round trips a day to get back to that increased level of service. Next slide. Recognizing the age of the vessels that would be purchased, Expedition 6, which is the vessel that's currently in day-to-day service, would need a major refurbishment in several years. You could start with the Expeditions 4 and 5 as backup vessels, but as funding becomes available, we'd recommend replacing them with new vessels designed for this purpose, and we'll get into some of the additional design recommendations there. Next slide. So for ridership to Lanai, the ridership is expected to be less than it was before for a variety of reasons. There is an essential air service subsidy now being provided to Mokulele for air service, so their prices are coming down. The fares for the ferry just went up. The Sea Glider, I know, is something that a lot of people are interested in, and that, if it comes to fruition, could increase competition. And just generally speaking, tourism and that activity on Maui is forecast to be lower than it was pre-COVID. That's based on the data we were seeing. So you saw a peak ridership of almost 200,000 in 2019. We're thinking, if you restarted service a year from now, it would be a little less than, it would be about 88,000 or so. And that's partially because service at that point would have to go to Maalaea, which isn't going to draw quite as many people. So there's that. But the ridership is correlated directly to the economic activity on Maui. And so it's very dependent on what the economy of Maui does. Next slide. So for Molokai, in the short term, because you have some time before there's a landing site available, and there are no vessels that we saw that are readily available for this service, we considered the option of purchasing like an offshore supply vessel or something like that and converting it. But after further investigation, that just didn't seem like it would be worth the investment. You're better off, if funding is available, design your own boats and build boats for this service that can meet the needs of the residents of Molokai and provide that service reliably and within the constraints of the landings and all the other constraints there. So we recognize, though, for service to Molokai that recently the changes and the issues with service from Mokulele are increasing the urgency of that service, and so that's something that we've given a little thought to, but it's not really part of this study, but we're happy to help out where we can when we get to that point. Next slide. So this is a picture of the harbor at Kaunakakai, and it's actually, I was very happy when I got out there and saw this, because I visit a lot of ferry terminals, and I didn't expect to see something that was in such good shape and ready to go. So that's going to be an easy landing. Needs a fresh coat of paint. The fenders could use a little bit of, repair, some minor details like that there. But generally speaking, that landing site's in good shape. It's got a passenger shelter, restrooms, that kind of thing, so that's all good. 2 round trips a day, similar service to what was provided earlier. The idea being that people on Molokai, and the vessel would spend the night on Molokai. First run in the morning would come over to Maui, bringing people who want to work on Maui. Some day trippers could go back to Molokai on the return run. In the afternoon, the day trippers come back to Maui, pick up the workers, and they go back home. So that's what this schedule is based on. And again, start of service aligned with the reopening of Lahaina. Next slide. So the ridership on Molokai is probably also going to be a little lower. We're expecting around 33,000. There is a lot of uncertainty around this, partially with the performance of Mokulele, the start of Sea Glider service. There is no longer an essential air subsidy to Mokulele for Molokai, but it could come back. And this ridership is based on assuming that the fares are the same between the Lanai service and the Molokai service. So all of those factors, we expect a little bit less ridership. Next slide. So next slide. So system-wide, this is long-term, and the path to get there we'll talk about. But a 5-vessel fleet, 2 bespoke vessels for service to Molokai, 2 bespoke vessels, 2 new vessels for service to Lanai, and then use Expedition 6 as a backup. With a refurbishment in a few years, she should be able to go and serve in that backup role for a good long time. The Lanai vessel is going to look very similar to what's in service there. Same service speed, same length. Molokai, a bigger vessel. I've heard advocates for monohulls with fin stabilizers, ride control system, other advocates for catamarans. There's a little bit more technical naval architecture work that needs to be done to figure out what that vessel should look like to serve that service and successfully and reliably. Common characteristics for all of the vessels, we heard there's a lot of interest in having more space for luggage, particularly possibly larger packages. We understand there's a weekly freight service to Lanai, something like that where you can bring bigger packages and have that part of the vessel design. That's one of the benefits of having a new vessel. Bring everything into alliance with all of the current EPA emission regulation standards, make it accessible, comply with all the Coast Guard requirements, and the amenities are standard passenger amenities, restrooms, basic refreshments on board. So nothing particularly challenging, but the additional cargo luggage capacity was something we noted and we would recommend. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. So the terminals are owned by the state. And so any improvements there would have to be requested improvements and have to work with the state to do that. But want to make sure there are restrooms, shelters, access to refreshments, and both in-person and online ticketing, probably ticket vending machines, try to stay current with that. And then the important thing is the ground transportation, better coordination with the Maui scheduled bus service. On Molokai, you would need some kind of shuttle because there's not room to park out at the end there at Kaunakakai. So you need parking on the island and then a shuttle to bring folks out. This might be something that MEO could support, or maybe a private operator. And then other considerations more locally here on Maui would be optimizing access for car share services. So if you're taking Uber or Lyft, it's easy for them to get in and circulate and pick people up, and you don't end up with just a traffic jam when the ferries come in. Next slide. So with the next slide, and on environmental recommendations, here we go. So there will be federal permitting required, particularly if you're using federal dollars to build the vessels. An environmental analysis, which is kind of it's not the lowest level of assessment required, but we don't think this would rise to the level of requiring a full environmental impact statement, which is a very extensive process. An environmental analysis should be enough for both the NEPA work, national policy work, and Hawaii environmental policy requirements. And we recognize that invasive species are a concern, so we want to recommend working with the invasive species committees and all the appropriate protocols and compliance with all of the existing rules, and as things develop, just continue to comply with that. Next slide. And then obviously the marine mammals and endangered species, this is a big concern. There are operations there. The DLNR has recommendations. It's a whale sanctuary. There are recommendations for operating in the sanctuary. So the intent would be to comply with those regulations, and where technology is available and proven viable, operate and use that technology, or make sure you've got extra eyes on the bridge to look for whales, and just best practices there. So vessels are operating there now, they're safe, and it's just continue to use those best practices. Next slide. Next slide. Operations. So with the ferry run, with the county-operated ferry, DOT still has some responsibilities. They don't just turn the key and walk away. There's oversight, there's grant programs, there's implementation work that has to be done, there are capital projects that have to be done. So what we've seen in our other clients that operate a service in this way is they have, some staff dedicated to overseeing the ferry, supporting that service. And so there would be some responsibilities to DOT staff. They would need some help to do this. The fares right now, Expeditions just went through the policy with the PUC to raise their fare. That request was granted, and that's how it works for private sector. But if it's a public fare, fares would be set the same way that they're set with the buses by the county, using the current fare process where the mayor's office and the council, go through, like I said, same as the bus. Needs to be affordable for residents. We would expect to see equity provisions between the islands. Ideally, there's alignment, and maybe even, if you ride the ferry, you get on the bus for free, some alignment and collaboration with the bus service. As fares go up and down, ridership is going to go up and down. But at the end of the day, for the public service, we expect there would be a need for a subsidy to cover all of the expenses. Next slide. So the ground transportation connections, I've mentioned this before. We would recommend that the Maui bus service be aligned so that a bus is at the terminal when people arrive at the terminal to take people where they want to go to improve that service. And these, as Counaway mentioned, are not carrying vehicles. So the people need to get places. And so working with the bus to make that work is important. And then just during the startup, the procurement process, you would need to acquire the existing vessels. You would need to acquire vessel engineering, naval architecture services to design new vessels. You need to have contracts to construct the new vessels. You have a contract to select a ferry service operator, and you would also need to contract to provide, you may need to provide some consultant support services to keep everything going while staff is ramping up. So a lot of procurement activities associated with getting things up and running. Next slide. So the operator would be responsible for basically operations and maintenance. That includes ticketing, vessel navigation, crew scheduling. So the operator will have their own administrative staff, but it will not be duplicating functions. The county staff will have their hands full with plenty of other things. The operator will also make sure that there's a place to tie up overnight. It might be moored out, which is done now. On Molokai, it might be possible to moor at the ferry terminal. And the operator is also responsible for routine maintenance, weekly, annual, periodic maintenance. Major capital projects would be the responsibility of the county, and they historically have been eligible for federal funding through various grant programs. So there's a distinction there, and we just went through this process with the island of Puerto Rico, and we negotiated a distinction between maintenance and capital that I think we could use that here as a good starting point. But you really need to be very clear in your contract on that distinction. Next slide. So the implementation schedule, the first thing you need to do is go through that environmental review, the environmental assessment process, And once that's underway and you've checked the boxes there and you've understood, documented the environmental impacts, you can start the process of acquiring both the existing vessels and acquiring the services to design the new vessels. And it takes, about a year or so, 6 months to 9 months to finish the design. It's going to take a year and change to build the vessels. We've gone back and forth on, do you want to build the Lanai vessels first, or do you want to build the Molokai vessels first? It depends on timing and availability of funding. It didn't make sense to start right away on the Molokai vessel process, because then you would end up with vessels before you likely had a place for them to land. But we also recognize that when we get into the funding and there's funding constraints, if there are constraints, then you can operate the existing vessels with maintenance and with more investment up front a little longer, and maybe you get the Molokai vessels first anyhow. So this is where the funding and those trade-offs come in. But the idea is the county could start the service relatively soon, essentially taking over the service as it exists now and transferring service or incorporating Lahaina as a landing when it's available. Next slide. So we think to do that, MDOT would need a full-time program manager and a part-time capital project manager, at least during the initial phase where there's a lot of contracts and a lot of startup costs and activities. But then you'll, throughout the project, and once it's up and running, you still need grant application support. You still need community outreach and engagement to understand, do the schedules need to change? Do the bus schedules to service the ferries need to change? That sort of work happens at continuous service planning, and there's always accounting, there's always some sort of procurement. Legal needs to review all the contracts. So just all of these things need to be kept in mind as you're looking at getting things started up. Next slide. So the financial analysis, we developed a pro forma for the startup and operation of both routes, and that goes out about 10 years to 2036, assuming that operating responsibility for service to Lanai starts in 2027 and service to Molokai starts in 2029. The pro forma includes both capital investments and operating expenditures. And the most important thing to note is this was written as though the money was available when you needed it to make things happen in the sequence that ideally they would happen. We know that's not the case, but we have to start somewhere. There's too many unknowns, so we just made that assumption, and things can adapt as funding is available. So on the next slide, you actually finally see the dollar signs. So this is just a summary of the pro forma, and over the first 5 years, you can see your operating income at a loss of almost $7 million. So it's an annual operating subsidy of 1.8 to 1.9 million. It's actually a little less initially because you're only serving Lanai. Service to Molokai is more expensive, and so it probably would require a higher subsidy, but we didn't necessarily look at that. We felt that it doesn't make sense to look at this as two separate routes. It's a system, and that comes from both an equity perspective and a management perspective. And so when we look at subsidies, we looked at the system subsidy, not a subsidy per route. So again, that's in the long term. It's a little less than $2 million a year, which actually is a relatively high fare box recovery ratio relative to a lot of other ferry operators. If you keep the fares where they are, you get most of your operating funds from those fares, whereas other ferry operators, as you can see, Washington State Ferries does the best at about 50%. Others are down in the 20% is all they get in terms of their operating cost as covered as a portion by their fares. Capital costs, you've got to buy, you've got to buy existing vessels, build new vessels, some capital investment to keep the existing vessels running longer. And so these are not small numbers. You know, the total capital program of around 44 million over 10 years. So that's why I say when we look at funding availability, that's going to affect your implementation schedule. Next slide. So this slide is what we know and what we had seen, and we make no guarantees about any of this at this point in time. But there have historically been both Federal Highways Administration funds and Federal Transit Authority funds for ferry operations, as well as General Department of Transportation funds through the RAISE program. There are ferry boat discretionary funds available through the formula programs, which you would not be eligible for initially. But as you had the ferries part of the National Ferry Census, National Census of Ferry Operators, to use the proper term, there are formula funds available. And then the FTA has grant programs specifically for ferries and some other programs that are more general that we've seen ferries successfully apply for. So historically there has been funding available, and hopefully there will continue to be going forward. So that's the quick run through. I was not keeping time. I hope it didn't take too long. But we're happy to take any questions. And,
Okay.
And we, yeah. We've got other folks on the line that can help us if needed.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you everyone for your expertise on this. We're going to first go into clarifying questions only, council members, clarifying questions. We'll get into deliberations as we move on, but I don't see any hands for clarifying questions. So let's, we do have one, Councilmember Paulton.
I wasn't familiar. If you can clarify sea glide.
Yeah, please.
So another important aspect of the sea gliders is that they would dock at harbors rather than fly out of airports. So that's why it would be more of a competition for the ferry service than like say Mokulele. So it's a 12-passenger vehicle that would dock at the small boat harbors and then go port to port, flying about, I don't know, 20 meters above the ground or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 20 feet off the ground is kind of where they have to be. So it's, and they
Sorry, off the water.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, they happen to also be a client of ours we're helping design some docks for them because they're unique landing characteristics. But they, like I said, they're all electric, and they expect to be, they're launching them now. And they would be coming into possibly Lahaina. They might come into Kahului.
I don't see any other hands for clarification, so we're going to go to the public testimony. This time, if there is anyone wishing to testify on this item, please use the raise your hand function and you will be called upon to testify. And staff, do we have anybody wishing to testify?
Chair, there's currently no individual signed up to testify, but I do see one person coming to the podium.
And then I know one of the expeditions captains will testify after, so go ahead.
Luna Ha'amolu Johnson, I stand in full support of getting you to work any way we can do possible, and Councilor Rollins Fernandez and other members of the general public that wish to visit the other Moku. And I wonder if you guys thought about a submarine.
Thank you, Mr. Law. Any clarifying questions for our testifiers? Seeing none, thank you once again. Let's see if expeditions, Billy Caldwell, did you want to testify, or whoever? Oh, and I see Lori Buchanan's hand up. So after Billy Caldwell testifies, we'll call on Lori Buchanan. Go ahead.
Aloha, Chair and members. Bill Caldwell, Expeditions, the president of the Maui Lanai Ferry. And I do support this excellent feasibility study that has been done. There's a lot of work to be done and a lot of stuff to discuss between the two parties. But we're willing, we're able. We've done it for over 35 years. We know what's happening with facilities, vessels, weather, whales, everything. So anyway, I don't have the answer to everything, but I'll do my best.
Mr. Caldwell, would you be willing to be a resource for us when we get into deliberations?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Excuse me for forgetting that, but yeah, I would definitely love
Okay.
to be a partner in this expedition.
All right.
No pun.
Good one, good one. I'm going to steal that. Members, without any objections, Rule 18A of the council to designate him as an expertise under his owning the, as a captain. You're a captain as well, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so no objections, members? Seeing none? Okay, so we'll probably get into questions for you once we get into deliberations. Thank you.
Mahalo.
So next we'll call on the testifier, Ms. Buchanan. Ms. Buchanan, if you're ready to testify.
Aloha, my most beloved council people. Just comments. I did comment when they did come to Molokai to reach out. I met extensively with them, and I did read all of their paraphernalia. And my comment is that we have safeguards in place to prevent the spread of invasive species between islands, because even now with what we have for biosecurity from the Department of Ag is really insufficient. And so this would even be more of a concern. And if the ferry is not significantly less in cost than Mokulele, then it will not likely attract the necessary amount of passengers to make it feasible. In fact, it's extremely expensive, like you just heard. But and there's a lot of buts. As to the sea glider, there was a lot of pushback on the island of Molokai initially on the sea glider. We already are very familiar with the outreach. And if you don't know by now, Surf Air is a big proponent of the sea glider, and they are the company that now owns Mokulele, the company that is giving us all the trouble. So just a connection there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Buchanan. Any clarifying questions for our testifier? Seeing none, thank you so much for your, we do have one from Councilmember Paulton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Buchanan, for your testimony. I wasn't clear. You're in support of the ferry, what they presented, that to have the ferry come out of Molokai, or not in support?
I had comments because I know how this came about, and I respect Member Johnson's trying to jump on one opportunity for the people of Lanai when it first came about. But what I would tell you is just this past weekend, I was a guest on Maui. I came for a funeral, and so I contributed to the transient accommodation tax by staying at the Westin Kaanapali and renting 4 rooms. And my cost for a 2-night, 3-day stay on Maui was in excess of $3,500 to bring my family for. And we, at the last minute, with the cancellations of Mokulele, I almost had to catch the boat. And there's boats going in between Molokai and Maui as we speak on a daily ride, boats that carry 15 people, and I would have contributed $80 on a one-way fare ticket ride from the boat from East Molokai arriving at Mala Wharf. And so again, if this ferry, depending on the subsidies, would not even be significant enough to make people ride an extra hour. So the boat ride from Molokai is equivalent to a plane ride of Mokulele from the Molokai airport to Kahului. It takes approximately 25 to 35 minutes, and the boat ride is approximately the same time for less cost, contributing directly to boat owners. And so, and by the way, you could rent a car from Alamo in West Maui. So it really was, I saw like a cottage industry being born in West Maui out of just local people coming in and out. But that was my experience as recent as of just this past weekend. Thank you.
Okay.
Was Mala, you were able to land at Mala with no problem? We did see some footage of all the commercial activity at Mala. Was that a problem for you?
I ended up not coming on the boat to Mala Wharf, but I would assume it is not a big issue. Otherwise, there would not be the free passage on a daily by so many people coming out from Molokai to Maui, most of them to catch a flight on Southwest or Hawaiian Air to Oahu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other, we have a clarifying question from Councilman Rollins Fernandez.
Mahalo, Chair. And just to clarify real quick, Member Johnson was advocating for Lanai, and since we were going to be doing the study, I asked if we could also include Molokai into the feasibility study. So Member Johnson wasn't imposing his ideas onto Molokai, just for the public.
Thank you.
Aloha, Ms. Buchanan, mahalo for your testimony. I just wanted to clarify regarding your response to Member Polton. The $70 would have been just a contribution to the cost of the gas, and not so much a fare, like a car.
That's correct. It would have just been a donation for them to be nice enough to take us at their convenience over to Maui. That's it. Thank you.
Mahalo for that clarification. Mahalo, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no other clarifying questions for our testifier, thank you, Ms. Buchanan. Do we have any other testifiers in the chambers? Anyone else wishing to testify? We won't make you a resource if you don't want to be a resource. Okay. Seeing none, any members, any objections to closing public testimony? Okay, let's get into the discussion of this item. I propose 3 minutes per council member for each round of discussion. So we'll start off with Vice Chair Sinensi, followed by Councilmember Uhu Hodges.
Chair, real quick.
Go ahead. Yes, beg your pardon.
Just for the disclosure requirement, I have 2 minors that are returning from home, and so now I'm not home alone. Mahalo, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Councilmember. Vice Chair Sinensi?
Mahalo, Chair, and mahalo for the presentation to the department and to the consultants. You did mention some, there were some federal funds available for ferry systems across the country, but I didn't quite get it. Are there available subsidies for these types of services for rural communities like Molokai and Lanai?
Mr. Butangan or anyone? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so there is what's called a Rural Ferries Grant Program from the Federal Transit Authority. However, it defines rural as a route that is, I think, more than 50 nautical miles, so that wouldn't be applicable. But the other ferry programs are applicable to service such as this, and it's not just restricted to major urban areas. So we've seen clients in a lot of other areas get this kind of service. I know I mentioned Puerto Rico, and we've done a lot of work with them, and they just took delivery of the first new ferry for service from Chiba to Vieques, and that's with federal dollars, and so that's a very comparable service in terms of population and expected ridership. So like I said, historically there have been grants available that would be applicable to this kind of service.
Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned building ferries from scratch. So would there be also options to just purchase maybe existing or already built ones versus building them from scratch for cost savings?
Mr. Levy? Would you? Or,
yeah,
okay.
I'll take that. It may be possible. It's been done before. The vessels that you end up with generally don't perform as well, and the conversion cost and the vessels that you might be able to buy used that are suitable probably currently exist on the Gulf Coast, and they're offshore supply vessels being used in the oil industry, and so you have quite a bit of cost of converting them into passenger vessels. You have the cost of getting them from the Gulf of Mexico out to Hawaii, And when they're out here, the ones, when I've seen that conversion work done, they're not very, they're not great vessels, and they wouldn't comply with the current EPA emissions. It's very difficult to get them to comply with the ADA regulations, and so while it's possible, it wouldn't be recommended unless there was something that we haven't considered.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I see Councilmember Hodges on the call. Yep, there she is. You have any questions, Councilmember?
Aloha, Chair. Also for my disclosure, I am currently alone right now, but my two boys are outside. I'm assuming they're going to be in and out. So they're not with me right now, but that doesn't mean they won't be with me in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Would you mind, can I go after? I missed some of it, but I'm assuming that my colleagues will spark some questions,
Sure.
if any. But I'm happy to go last. Thank you so much.
We'll put you last. Committee Member Tom Cook, followed by Chair Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions because it's been really comprehensive. I am going to have to go to a meeting at 3. I think you'll still have quorum.
Yeah.
Let me know if that's an issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Tom Cook, followed by Council Chair Alice Lee, followed by Councilmember Paulton.
Okay, I do have a question on the timeline. Because an EA generally takes a long time, what kind of anticipated timeline are you expecting with all the study, the studies that have to be made, the financing that has to be put together, all of these things, working with the community on schedules? Do you have any idea how, are we talking 2 years, 3 years?
Mr. Levy?
I think on the timing, the EA, based on the environmental consultant here on Maui that we worked with, they estimated that will take about a year. There is other work that can be done in parallel with that. You can't start spending federal money if it's available, but you can start looking for the grants and start seeking those federal funds in the interim. You can start doing some of the public engagement, doing some of the preliminary schedule development. The longest lead is once you do secure funding is starting the vessel acquisition process, and the new vessels, it's good part of a year to get through design and procurement, then it's going to take a year and change to build them. So that's a couple of years before you have new vessels. But in terms of starting the service, if you were to acquire the vessels from Expeditions and make it a county operated service, that's limited by the contracting and negotiation and funding. But we think that's still probably a year to 2 years before even that short term would be possible.
Okay, Kawanoi, how much money would you need in the upcoming budget?
Chair?
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Council Chair, for the question. Can the department get back to you with that answer? So we have put together our budget requests to the administration. So you'll see that in the budget proposal that comes from Mayor next month.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay.
That's all I have, Chair.
All right, thank you, Chair Lee. Let's follow Committee Member Tamara Paulton, followed by Council Vice Chair Yuka Sugimura.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, KPFF. I was interested in what Ms. Buchanan said about the cottage industry. Did you guys get more feedback like that, either from Molokai or Lanai?
Mr. Levy?
Actually, I can take that
okay,
one.
Mr. Bitanga?
Chair. So yes, we are aware of crossings between the Pailolo Channel, and that has increased since the flight cancellations by Mokulele last month. We don't have good data, but we have heard that that has been happening. And we have been in conversation with Councilmember Rollins Fernandez to try to see if we can figure out a solution sooner rather than later, so it doesn't have to continue. But we are subject to rules and regulations that, the public may not. So we would not be able to get a Coast Guard certified vessel through MALA, for example. There are regulations that we could not circumvent, like NEPA. So yes, we're aware that it's happening. We are trying to figure out a solution so that it doesn't have to continue. But there are constraints that the department has to go through that the general public does not.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Let's try to keep it on the feasibility study that we spent $300,000 for. Let's talk about that. All right? Please.
Be the ones that are running on that route. The ones that were running on Lanai would probably overnight here at Maui.
And the reason why Molokai one would need to be bigger is because the Pailolo is rougher,
That's right.
and so it would be less bumpy.
Yes.
But you anticipate there would be no-go days in the winter, possibly?
Very likely. I believe that happened in the past.
And that's my time.
Okay. Let's move on to Councilmember Sugimura and then myself.
Thank you. I am guessing that when you speak about this, for Kaunui Patangan, I look at you now as MPO, but you're speaking in behalf of the DOT in
Sure.
terms of
Mr.
a budget.
Patangan?
Yeah, so
I know that.
I was the one who wrote the RFP when I was with Department of Transportation.
Right.
I served as the project manager for the department when it first got started. And when I switched roles, I asked my policy board for permission to continue serving as project manager. Once the feasibility study is concluded, DOT will be the primary. I will still be involved because federal highway dollars and federal transit administration dollars are coordinated through my office.
Is that you still wanted to continue doing this project, and you did get our policy board approval to continue, which appreciate that. And that is a great thing about MPO, right? The federal funds flow through MPO, so there'll be a continuation of coordination. Thank you for that. So if you could explain, or someone could explain this portion, which I think is of interest, is this fare box recovery and the service types and the ferry system that you have listed here, which goes NYC, which is New York, San Francisco, King County, and Washington State ferries, which looks like the most productive. So can you explain what that means, and how would that be relevant to us?
Would that be Mr. Mills or?
Chair, I can start off by providing
Go ahead.
context and ask that the consultants give a little bit more detail for this specific one. So public transportation, by definition, is a public good. Those
Amen.
generally are not revenue generating. So fare box recovery speaks to how
Automobiles, so they're much larger, slower vessels, and they generate more revenue because they charge a lot more for vehicles. They generate more revenue because they charge a lot more for vehicles, and so they do fairly well. The other ferries, the recovery ratio is the dollars generated from the fare box divided by the total cost. And so, if your total cost was $28 million and your fare box recovery ratio is 15%, that would mean you're getting 14 million in revenue. But here you're getting 21 million in revenue, 28 million in expenses over 5 years. So that's about a 75% ratio. So it's actually very good relative to comparable systems.
Oh, thank you for explaining that. I was thinking of it in the reverse way of the presentation. So thank you for that. I guess I'm out of my time.
Let's see. Okay, so I'll go next, and then we'll go with Councilmember Uhages and followed up by Councilmember Morales Fernandez. So let's see here. My questions are basically Did you consider using this ferry during any type of emergency? Many times the poly is shut down due to fires, landslides, et cetera, all kinds of emergencies. And during, there was periods when we thought, wow, if we could go from Lahaina to Ma'alaya and go around the poly when it's closed down. Is that something any of you folks considered?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. That was one of the tasks, and we felt that, we had more important things. It wasn't in the presentation, but it is something we studied. It is in the report, and our finding was that ferries can provide some support services. These ferries only carry people, and so they're not going to be able to move heavy equipment. They're not going to be able to move large amounts of supplies, but they would be able to take first responders out, around to the east end of the island, and they could do some evacuation services. Unfortunately, the landing sites that we looked at, Hana and Kihei, Hana was in the best condition, but it would still need a little bit of work to be prepped as a potential landing site, so it needs some work there. Kihei, possible, but we looked at it, and it would be useful for, like I said, personnel, getting people in, getting people out in some materials, but limited by that, their capacity.
Right, thank you. So I'm going to switch real quick, different subject. Basically, we decide the fees of the tickets during rates and fees during budget. Can we maybe separate for Kama'aina rates and non-Kama'aina rates the way they do now? We could generate more revenue by folks who aren't from here or without a driver's license. Does that form any kind of legal issue when it comes to asking for federal monies?
Good point.
Federal rules are that you can't discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. So because Kama'aina is based on residency, it's not one of those. So you should
Delicious.
You should not have to worry about that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right, so the other question I have is, you mentioned the size of the Molokai ferry would have to be pretty large to handle the seas. My understanding is there's a size limit for entering and exiting small boat harbors. Did you guys consider that you can't really have a big boat going in and out of the harbors? But maybe it's changed. I don't know. It's a state law. I don't know if you guys looked into that.
Yeah, that is something we heard. We did talk to the operator of the former Molokai ferry, and that vessel, which was, I believe, 105 feet.
Oh, is that right?
He was able to bring it in easy and, operate there.
I didn't know it was 105.
Whether he was bending the rules or not, I don't know. But
Okay. Well, there's a precedent. Okay. My time's up. We're going to move on to Councilmember U'u Hodges, followed by Councilmember Rollins Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your question for the Kama'aina pricing on tickets. So following up on that, I rode the Seattle ferry several times, once just as like a walk-in passenger and once with like a car. And the car wasn't too expensive that I remember. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestion for ticket prices to kind of make it up.
Oh,
Who would like to tackle that? Oh, go ahead.
say it for me.
Is that Mr. Mills?
Bennett.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bennett.
We'd recommend starting with the fares that are currently in use for the service to Lanai. They just went up. Ridership is, I'm not sure exactly what they're doing to ridership, but that fare would be a good starting point.
If I could add, one of the advantages of having the county taking over the ferry is that you would be controlling the fares, unlike the current system, which is regulated by the PUC. So as long as you held public hearings and received public input, you would be able to adjust the fares as you like.
Okay, thank you for that. And to Member Johnson's or Chair Johnson's point, we do have come on the pricing on the current rate. So that's all I have for now, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on to Councilmember Morales Fernandez.
Mahalo, Chair. And mahalo to everyone. I just wanted to start off with really thanking you for first discussing the idea of having something operate as soon as possible to address what's going on right now in Mokulele while we wait for, the potential of Pacific Air charters servicing Molokai. We ultimately weren't able to find a way that wouldn't trigger NEPA. And so the regulations for government make it too tricky for us to be able to operate something immediately like I was hoping that perhaps we could. So I just wanted to thank you all for, having that discussion. Mr. Batangan, thank you so much. Okay, so my question, I'll start with the Molokai, the round one. I saw in round two, it said everything in round one except invasive species was brought up in round two. If round one is the meeting that we had at Kuala Pu'u Community or Rec Center, then I know that round one invasive species was brought up because I was the one that brought it up. So I was surprised to see it listed that way. The second thing I wanted to emphasize was about the fair, that because when the Molokai Princess, Maui Princess used to operate, it was like a 2-hour ferry ride, that the trade-off for a longer transportation time would have to be something really low. And back when Maui Princess used to operate with heavy subsidies, the fare was like $12.50 or something, $12 one way, which was like, which made the 2-hour ride doable for that trade-off, right? And so if we have a ferry, the fare would have to be much more competitive for the riders to ride it. I'll stop there, and then I have a couple questions about the Lanai one. I'll just ask it. So you talked about building ferries for Lanai. I was curious why we wouldn't just buy the expedition ferries. Oh, and then Mr. Caldwell is here, so maybe he can speak to that. And that expeditions pre-COVID operated in the black, which was something that Member Johnson shared with us, which I found really interesting, that they don't need a subsidy to operate. Well, they didn't until the fires and COVID.
Right.
Okay, I'll stop there.
So who would like to respond? Go ahead, Mr.
Chair, may I take
Batangan?
that? Thank you, Chair. So for slide 10, round 2 of engagement under Molokai, it reads similar issues to round 1, including concerns about transport of invasive species and tourist day trippers. That may have just been me getting too cute. I was really trying to highlight the message that we heard over and over and over about invasive species and tourist day trippers, that I may have caused some confusion. But I really wanted to hammer home, we hear you on those issues. And so they are big concerns for us. Regarding the fares, the modeling that the consultant team took was at our direction. I was the one who asked that they utilize the existing fares as the basis of their projections, because there wasn't much to go off of otherwise, and asked that they hold similar for equity purposes. So if there are issues with the model, that would be my fault too. What was the last question? It had to do with purchasing of...
I think she was asking about expeditions running in the black before...
No, before that one.
There was another one? Go ahead.
Why would we consider building a ferry for Lanai when Expeditions was looking to sell. So why wouldn't we buy the ferries that Expeditions is selling?
So I think the recommendation would be to purchase some of the existing vessels, but over time we would need to replace some of the older ones. So there would also be a need to purchase new vessels for that route as well. So for Molokai, it would be purchase 2 new vessels. For Lanai, it would be to purchase existing vessels, utilize their useful life service, and then replace them as needed. Did I
Mahalo.
answer
And
that
then
correctly?
for Mr. Caldwell. Yes. Thank you so much.
Mr. Caldwell, will you
And
come
then
down to the podium?
Elizabeth,
Let's have.
operations. Coming down. Okay. And I just wanted to say I love the Expedition ferries. It's always so quick, and it's such a nice smooth ride. I love the catamaran design, and I see you at the podium, so I'll stop.
Okay, repeat the question, please.
Member Johnson shared with us that the way you folks operated pre-COVID was that you folks always operated in the black and not in the red, and you don't need subsidies. So I found that really interesting, and learn more about that, or if you could confirm that.
A lot of different things happened over the years, so that's why we've had county subsidy. We've had the PUC grant us the raise ticket fare increase due to a lot of factors. The main one was not raising our rates for 16 years. So we put all the numbers together, sent it to them, let them digest it, and this is what we came out. We're finally in the black, November, December, and January. Even though the ridership is down a bit, it's not really due to the fare increases. I think the majority is because we had a lot more visitors, being the visitor rate being the highest of them all, then it offset that. So what has happened is the higher ticket fares have balanced and put us in the black. We are very, very, very happy about that. How long is it going to last? We don't know, because the PUC stipulation in the final order is they have the choice to come and do an investigation on our ticket increases to see where our profitability or not profitability is happening to our bottom line, if that makes sense. We're still cautiously, the biggest thing is our employees and staying competitive with the rest of the industry, as we cannot arbitrarily raise our prices due to the fact of the PUC regulation. So hopefully that helps you understand most of the picture. Am I missing anything?
Well, Captain Caldwell, if I can just follow up what Councilmember Rollins Fernandez, you didn't raise ticket prices for 16 years. You must have been making, not running in the red, right? You must have been making money, right?
Well, we did have, again, it was a different operation back then. We were running 5 round trips a day.
Yeah, that's true.
So when you multiply that at a lower rate, then you have a profitability. We also haven't built any new vessels since 2016. That is. We also have the older vessels. As a matter of fact, we have Expeditions 4 in dry dock, which the welding on replacing the plates and the shaft logs has come to $40,000 alone. That doesn't include the labor. That doesn't include the yard. That doesn't include any of it. So
I know it's expensive to run a ferry, of course. Thank you so much. I love Expeditions 4. It's the Cadillac of your fleet.
Well, thank you. That's why we're here.
Thank you.
Consistency.
Thank you, Captain. Okay, members, that was a 1 round for everybody. I really appreciate the discussion. I want to thank everybody, all of the consultants in the department, and everybody who's had a hand on this. I think it's really fascinating, and I think there is a lane for public transportation in this county, in our multiple island county. So Without objection, members, we can defer this item?
No objections.
All right. Okay, thank you guys so much. I don't see any hands up, so we're going to excuse everybody and thank you. I really appreciate all of you. Okay.
Good job.
Yeah. We're going to switch over to another topic, so let's take a break. What do you guys think?
Okay, good.
About a 10-minute break, members? So it's 3:16 at 3:26. This ADEPT committee will come back from recess on 2/20/25. Will the ADEPT Committee of 2/2025 come back to order? Its time is now 3:30 p.m. All right, members, we're on our last item on the agenda, and I think we're ready to rock and roll. In accordance with, this is the operation and budget review of the Department of Transportation. So in accordance with Rule 7B of the Rules of the Council, the committee will receive a presentation and discuss matters relating to an operational and budgetary review of the Department of Transportation. No legislative action will take place. This is the last but not least of the budgetary and operational reviews under the ADEPT Committee's jurisdiction plan for today. Thank you all for hanging in there, members. Really appreciate it. Deputy Director Yogi and Mr. Nakamoto, thank you for joining us today. And if you're ready, please proceed with your presentation.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Johnson and committee members. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Diane Yogi. I'm the Deputy Director of the Department of Transportation. Also here with me is Neil Nakamoto, our Program Specialist 3, and I'll be reviewing the department's operations and fiscal year 25 budget in this afternoon's presentation. Next slide, please. The Department of Transportation's responsibility here are set forth.
Deputy Director, could you take the mic and put it a little closer? I'm sorry,
Sure.
a little soft. Thank you.
No problem. Sorry. The Department of Transportation's responsibilities here are set forth in the charter and date back to the department's creation in 2002. Next slide, please. This is the organizational chart for our department. We are a small department that currently has 8 employees, although we do have 12 EPs allocated. One of those positions is under active recruitment, and the 3 others are currently going through DPS review to fill. We currently oversee 6 transportation programs: the Maui Bus Fixed Route Service, the Maui Bus ADA Paratransit Service, the Maui Bus Commuter Service, the Air Ambulance Program, the Human Services Transportation Program, and the Park Maui Program. Additionally, we are administratively tied to the Maui Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is responsible for the Maui's transportation planning. Next slide, please. Our department's budget is broken down into 3 funding sources: the General Fund, the Highway Fund, and the Grant Revenue Fund. The General Fund covers our administration program, the Human Services Transportation Program, the Air Ambulance Program, and the Park Maui Program. The Highway Fund covers the Maui Bus Fixed Route, ADA, Paratransit, and Commuter Services, as well as the matching funds necessary for the county to secure outside grants. The Grant Revenue Fund covers operations, capital equipment, and capital improvement projects for which we are able to secure grants. Next slide, please. With regards to the general fund, our administration program funds our salaries and office administrative operations. As mentioned previously, we are allocated 12 EPs, but currently have 8 employees in the department, with 1 active recruitment, which is our Planner 5, and 3 ongoing going through DPS review to fill. 2 are limited term appointments, and 1 is a grant specialist 2 that we received 6-month funding for in this fiscal year. Also included in our this program are fiscal year 25 funds for the MEO bus replacement program. The decrease in operations are primarily due to the MEO bus replacement program's requests decreased in fiscal year 2025, and the funding for the ferry feasibility study was no longer needed this fiscal year. The increase in salaries was due to the salary commission increases, collective bargaining increases, and an additional EP. Next slide, please. The General Fund also provides for Human Services Transportation Program, which includes services for senior services transportation, senior nutrition, Maui adult daycare, youth transportation, rural shuttles, and dialysis. The General Fund also funds Maui County's portion of the Air Ambulance Services and the Park Maui Program. The increase in the Human Services Transportation Program was due to the collective bargaining agreement between MEO and the union. The decrease in the Park Maui program was due to the unforeseen delay of the implementation of the program. Next slide, please. The Highway Fund supports the Maui Bus Fixed Route, ADA Paratransit, and commuter services, as well as the matching funds necessary for the county to secure outside grants. These grants include bus and bus-related equipment matching funds and Maui MPO matching funds. Also included in the public transit programs are Kahului Transit Hub operational expenses, our bus stop and maintenance funds, which includes a contract for shelter pressure washing on a monthly basis and trash removal 3 times weekly for each sheltered stop, as well as call-outs. There was a small increase in the administrative program due to the increase in the Maui MPO matching funds. Next slide, please. Funded by grant revenue funds are funds allocated for different types of federal funds expected from the Federal Transit Administration and the Maui MPO. Grant revenue includes FTA discretionary competitive grants, congressional discretionary funds, and other transportation grants. There are also 4 grant revenue funded EP positions that fall under transportation, and they are the Maui MPO Executive Director and Maui MPO staff members. They are administratively tied to our department. There are 2 open EP new positions allocated for the MPO, and they are moving forward with recruitment shortly. Grant funds received in fiscal year 25 are FTA Section 5311, 5307, and 5339 grants. Next slide, please. For capital improvement projects in fiscal year 25, we are continuing with the bus stops and shelter program, which includes planning and design and construction phases. We are also currently working with our consultants on the master plan for our transportation maintenance base yard. Next slide, please. Lastly, here's our contact information, and if there's any questions, please let me know. Thank you. Sorry, I did it so fast.
No, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Let's go if we have any clarifying questions, members. Any clarifying questions? I don't see any, so let's open up public testimony just for this item. At this time, if there's anyone wishing to testify on this item, please use the raise your hand function and you will be called upon to testify. Staff, is there anyone wishing to testify?
Chair, I see one individual coming down to the podium to testify.
Come on down.
Hey, long time no see, Luna Molu Johnson. I'm a frequent bus rider. I'm like in the top 10 bus riders on Maui County, I think. And, okay, I just want to give compliments to all the drivers. They've been really going through a lot since they went through COVID and then the fire, and they're short-staffed just like everybody else. And I would just like to ask that if there's some way, if Roberts, I think, has they have like a health insurance program, but I would just like to see maybe some kind of gym membership for the drivers, and maybe the county can help them out, because sitting all day like that is really not too good for your lower half. And but down to the serious business is the new bus transit center started out kind of tough, but now they're kind of relaxing a little bit. I think they just want to make sure everybody behave themselves. So I didn't get yelled at by the security guard too much. And I'm glad the deputy director came and explained a few things about the trash service and stuff, because I was watching that. And I did meet the director, Takamori, the first day.
Chair, there's currently no other individual signed up to testify. You could do a last call if you'd like.
Okay, last call for testifiers. Seeing none. Okay, members, any objections to closing public testimony on this item? Okay, let's get into deliberations. The operational budgetary review of the Department of Transportation. I propose 3 minutes for our members. We'll go, why don't we go in reverse this time? Okay, so we can, everybody gets a chance. We'll go with Council Vice Chair Yukile Sugimori, followed by Councilmember Paulton.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to, I think you mentioned MPO because they fall administratively under you. And I do know that we have to increase our match, that it was being calculated incorrectly. So we're going to have to increase our, did you mention that it's in the new budget, or did you mention that at all?
Thank you, Chair.
Yep.
Yes, that is correct. We are in communications with the financial person for the Maui MPO, and she keeps us abreast of any type of
so we can
increase.
anticipate that.
Yes.
Yeah, and the good thing about that, members, is that because we are increasing that amount, the match, we actually have more to spend. So we were undercutting ourselves by our match being too low, is the way that I heard it at, in our meeting. So in general, we're going to be paying more for the match. I don't know what the number is, but we'll see in the fiscal 26 budget. But what that means that we'll get more federal funding. Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah, maybe just pull your mic a little closer to you.
Okay. I'm done, though.
Okay.
I'm really glad to see Diane here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank
Welcome
you very
aboard,
much.
Ms. Yogi.
Yeah, welcome. And then also, of course, we have you here. So, Neil. Yeah. So we have to say, Neil, can you say something? Because you're new. I haven't seen you here before.
Is that okay, something? Go ahead, say something.
So, yeah, basically I got hired on only maybe 5 months ago.
Oh, no wonder.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm for Park Maui, but then immediately they informed me that, we have a feasibility study. I said, sure, I can help whatever you need me. So it's fine.
We like good attitudes, right?
Yeah,
Especially
it's the
for
can-do kind, yeah.
Can-do kind,
Yeah.
especially a small department with the amount of, people you touch, and thank you.
All right.
No further questions.
Thank
I
you.
have to just compliment them.
Sure. Okay, let's move on with Councilmember Paulton, followed by Chair Lee if she's going to be on. But go ahead, Councilmember Paulton.
Thank you, Chair. I asked majority of my questions during the technical difficulties, but to recap, it was about, the carrot and the stick if we're going to be, citing folks in the burn zone and parking on street in a 28 feet or less road width. What is the carrot and where are people supposed to park and how are they supposed to get to work? So was kind of discussing about a B-type situation for Lahaina. So I guess I'll center questions around that. When they had the B, the Wailuku B, was that under you folks or specifically management?
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. That was actually under the Department of Management when they were working on the Wailuku Garage.
And they didn't coordinate with you folks at all?
It was more an independent endeavor on for that garage.
Do you guys still have an RSF under the fire? Like a recovery support function with Office of Recovery?
No.
Oh.
Not within our department, no.
Okay, and then the other issue that had come up is if we are transitioning to no parking, which might mean no cars, have you been in discussion with MEMA at all about emergency evacuations or MEO paratransit? Because a lot of our paratransit riders were the ones that didn't survive the fire. So has anybody been coordinating with you folks about emergency evacuations with an emphasis on our elderly and disabled?
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we did have a meeting with MEMA, and we have been having internal conversations within our department of creating an emergency plan, emergency evacuations, that type of. It's still in the early stages, but it's definitely something that we are working on.
So Parrish County in Louisiana, they have a registry form for folks like that would need additional assistance in evacuations. Do you want me to try send you that?
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. What email do you want it to?
You can send it to the public.transit at co.maui. hi.us, I believe.
Transit.
Public.transit.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I guess too, the other thing was about like, what is your hour? Oh, never mind.
You can ask your last question if you like, because we're only going to do one round.
What is your hours of operations, and do you think that serves our working population that works restaurant and bars, and would that be a possibility to serve our residents that often are making low income and having a hard time to park at work and at home? Like, do you see the value in focusing on that population more than the 8 to 5?
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. We have been trying to extend our services based on demand. We recently extended our Kihei Islander and Kihei Villager routes out an hour, as well as an additional hour out to Lahaina from our transit hub. We haven't really internally discussed the options of, like you were mentioning, early morning or late evening types of services, but it's something that we can definitely take a look at and see what kind of possibility.
In a very narrow space in some place like Paia Town. But why don't you guys explain to, I guess, the public and the other members what you know about why it's a little bit more difficult than, unfortunately, what it seems.
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. A lot of our bus stops, the way we determine whether or not they get a shelter is the number of boardings in the area at the particular stop, and also demand. So Paia Town is a difficult area. We would have to make sure that we have the right of way and all of the area to be able to construct a stop.
Adjacent landowner to buy some of their properties so that we can go into their space and create this covered shelter. Because I was asking for all kinds of things, because we don't even have a bench. We don't have anything. We don't have anything. But that would mean we would need to like cut into the sidewalk, do ADA, do SMA permits, of course, and then potentially acquire more land from the adjacent landowners, because it's such a narrow town. So it turned into such a convoluted process. I just told my neighbors, if you need a bench, let me know. I can have my brothers help build you one, and we'll just put it there, and we won't tell anybody about it. That was like my version of solving that problem. But anyways, it was a little bit more complicated than I guess what I had ever thought it being is just such a tiny little shelter. But we do have to follow all these rules and regs that the general public doesn't have to, as we just discussed in the last one. But nonetheless, I do appreciate you guys' help. Thank you so much, and thanks for your presentation. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Hodges going rogue. Okay, now we're going to go on to Vice Chair Sinensi.
Mahalo, Chair, and mahalo, Deputy Yogi. Nice to see you, Diane. Members, Diane is my Lahaina Luna classmate. She doesn't look like she aged any too. But thank you for the presentation. You did mention that there were $18 million in federal funding for projects, and I don't know if that's through the MPO. And I was wondering, with the federal freeze, does that kind of put a hold on some of those, or potentially put a hold on some of those CIP projects?
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. We have been very closely monitoring what's going on with the federal dollars. We've actually been getting daily updates through our Washington liaison. So fingers crossed, we can still move forward with the grants that we're hoping to obligate. There are a few that we are in the process of obligating, and there is some urgency for us to do that. But future grants, we are keeping a really close look at to make sure that we still have access to those types of funds.
Right, I can imagine all the craziness going on. And then I was going to ask Director Batangian about the state harbors, but I can call him later about just kind of working closely with our state representatives as far as, again, Chair, with the ferry study, that having that close contact with the state DOT Harbors Division. So that was just my other question, Chair, but appreciate the presentation. Mahalo.
Vice Chair, Vice Committee, do you want to have us write that question down and send it to him? Is that a good route to do as a committee? Can we write down that question?
Yeah, just moving forward with the study, and then just maybe being more participatory with the rebuild of, or having some kind of input in the rebuild of the harbor. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll move on to my questions. First off, thank you for joining us. It's nice to see you in person. I'm really curious about the free fare bus program. Of course, it's a big passion of mine, as a bus rider. Do you have any data to share with the council, such as how many?
4.
Okay,
yeah.
And so it's on, 11 months now, if my math is right? So have you guys been gathering data on how's it?
Yes, if you can put it in writing for me, I can definitely get.
Okay, staff, you guys got that? The two questions specifically is how many people ride using the pass, and then which routes have the most types of that type of rider on them. So that's my question for the first one. The second question, you mentioned you have 3 positions in the DPS, with the DPS. How long has those positions been in the DPS?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the 2 positions that we have open are limited term appointments, which would be my civil service position and our private secretary came on board with return rights. So those are 2 limited term appointments that we are currently working on. The 3rd open position is our grant specialist 2. And because it was funded for 6 months, we started the process with DPS just a few months ago, and it's been progressing pretty quickly. I have a really good relationship with our DPS specialist, and Kainia has been extremely helpful with our department as well. So
okay, it's feedback that I've been hearing from many departments that the process is slow at DPS, and if you say that you have a 6-month position and you said you're already 2 months in with them sorting it out, and you have a 4-month position.
Yes, so
that's a concern of mine, I'm just saying, but I don't think you can we can't fix, it's not your department, but I'm just, how's it affecting you guys is my concern.
The sooner we can fill our positions, the better.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, those are my questions. We got a little bit of time. Does anybody have any last burning questions for our Department of Public Transportation? Because that takes us to the end of the agenda. So anybody else? Go ahead, Councilmember Paulton.
Would you guys know anything about the harbor because the feasibility study, they said when the harbor returns to reoperation. Do you guys know anything about that, or are you pushing for it?
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have I don't personally know a timeline as far as when the harbor would be ready. The focus of the study was in hopes that we can get our collaboration from the Lahaina community about a year before the harbor's ready. So it's definitely something we are going to focus on should we move forward with the ferries.
Did they share
program.
with you why the new dock that was paid for with federal funds wasn't good for the expeditions?
I can jump in on that. The feds built the dock without consulting Expeditions Ferry. So their boat is this tall out of the water, and the ferry dock itself is this tall out of the water. So they can't use it unless they do massive changes to either the dock or to their vessel.
Like make stairs down from the dock or something?
That has to be ADA compliant, has to lock in heavy surge. It's a little bit more. And who's going to pay? So I think they just said, we'll use the old dock because we're in alignment. So that's why that other dock was more for the cruise ships, if you remember pre-fire,
Yeah, the tenders. And then the last one, I went one time and I think MEO has like a dispatch for all the buses if that's who you subcontract with to run the Maui bus or what. But is there a policy amongst the Maui bus to call in situations either to the non-emergency line or to MEMA? Because sometimes the police or whomever aren't out on the road to see the conditions, and then you don't know when an evacuation is going to be warranted. So that kind of like on the ground eyes communication would be to our benefit. Like, for a while, every morning, the Napili House stoplight, the temporary one was out, and I would call every morning, like, are you going to get a police? Because there's a school right here at this intersection. And, like, by the third morning, State Highways had someone adjusting the light. And I kind of think, like, if I didn't call, like, 3 days in a row, it may never have gotten issued. And plenty guys like to just complain, but they don't take it to the right source to get it fixed. And so I was wondering if that's a policy amongst your bus drivers when they see something that, I guess a see something, say something kind of policy, because otherwise, most likely it won't get addressed. And then, like, the whole snafu yesterday with Kapuna Kea Street, and it was super triggering, like, people were waiting in traffic for 2 hours or whatever. And so now State Department said, okay, we're going to do night work, like after people got all pissed off. Like those types of observations, do you have a policy with your bus drivers to communicate what is actually going on the road to see that if it could be fixed? Because even I've had people say, hey, this light is not letting everyone through. And they email me, and then I forward it to DOT, and then they fix it. But if they're not informed, then it's just gonna make everybody more upset. So I just was wondering about a see something, say something policy with your bus drivers.
Deputy Director?
Thank you, Chair. That's an excellent point. The bus drivers do report to us things that they see on their route. But if they could, inform non-emergency or inform through the dispatch, that's something that we can definitely talk to Roberts to incorporate into their, I know they're busy watching the routes and all of that, but that is something that we could bring up to them for sure.
Yeah, maybe not the bus driver calling, but just relaying it to the dispatch, and dispatch can relay the message, so it's safe driving kind of stuff.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
All right. Sure. Good question. All right. I'll just ask one last question, and I think we can end on that. But you had $600,000 for benches and shelters. Is that correct? And how many does that? I know they're expensive. I once heard there was $100,000 per one. So are we talking like 6 shelters?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Part of that money is planning and design.
Okay.
And that's where the largest cost is.
Okay.
The shelter structure itself is not as costly. I mean, the price did go up realistically with the cost of everything else. But it is getting the groundwork, permits,
So do you have a number on, or there isn't a number, it's just for a program or a design and permitting, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, all right.
No, actually, I think it's about, we usually go about 200,000 for planning and design and 400,000 for the actual construction.
So one is what this money can buy?
That would be probably about 4.
Okay, 4.
Yeah. Depending on the area, but
All
usually
right.
it's about 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a job for No Hate's brother or family. Okay. All right, members, that takes us to the end of the agenda. Without any objections, I'll defer this item. All right, we want to thank you guys so much for staying the afternoon with us. So this end of the agenda, members, this concludes the Agriculture, Diversification, Environment, and Public Transportation meeting. Thank you all. Staff, did I miss anything? Okay, the time is now 4:05, and this meeting is adjourned at ADEPT Committee of 2/2025.